in Korea, we know through the news that the government, I think, still is encouraging people to try to have more children. What's really interesting, though, is that if you go back to a certain time in Korea's history, maybe the late 70s, early 80s, I forget, I remember seeing pamphlets that were being distributed at the time that was encouraging people to stop having children.
Wait,
Yes.
you remember seeing pamphlets?
Not here.
I was like, what?
I was in Gangnam. So it's interesting. So how things can change throughout the years in a particular country and how things are different in different countries. And that is our topic for today's Culture Vulture, baby policies.
Yeah, childbirth policies from country to country, what they perhaps strictly enforce in some cases, and in other cases it's just guidance. And you're right, with Korea, and that's kind of a microcosm for many countries that were maybe developing 40, 50 years ago. It was kind of seen as if your population expands too quickly, we're not going to have the infrastructure to look after all these people. It's not going to be good for the economy as a whole.
I'm correct, though, right, when I say that?
Yes, yeah.
That there was a time in Korea's history when the government was suggesting, okay, slow down. That's our
Like after the war and then
Maybe?
a little bit later when the economy was starting to like really build up and stuff like that. I think that's right around the time.
My mum was born in the 50s, the last of 7 children in her family. And that was common back
Yeah.
in the 50s, maybe even into the 60s. You'd see households with at least 4 kids. And unfortunately, a country, when it's developing, it can't support all those mouths to feed, right? And so it kind of goes back and forth. Now we're at the opposite end of the scale. People aren't having nearly enough kids to support the population. So I think the magic number is about 2.1 kids per family to sustain a population, to keep it stable, right?
That's interesting.
Yeah, because there's 2 adults, right, in the normal family, let's say, and they've got to have those 2 kids and just a little more in case of like early deaths and stuff like this to keep it stable. And in China, last week, they came out with the announcement that they are going to be allowing each family now to have 3 children. It's not that long since China still had their one-child policy. Did you learn about that in school?
I learned about it after I moved to Korea, but I didn't learn about it in school.
Yeah, I remember in geography class, like we learnt about it for like demographics, and it was like such a shock to the system. I was like, what do you mean the government is telling you how many children to have, you know? And in China, they don't call it that. They don't call it the one-child policy because it's not strictly one child for everyone. Not a lot of people outside China are fully aware with the details. Like for minorities in the past, you could have as many as you want, basically. They easily have 3 or 4 if you're living in the countryside, you're a Tibetan or Uyghur, because it was to do with poverty, and the Chinese government kind of focused on people in cities and then mostly people of Chinese ethnicity. But if you were from the countryside and you're Chinese and you had a daughter first, you could often then have permission to have a second because sons were so valued.
But if you had a son first, then that would be it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's led to, unfortunately, a lot of terrible societal problems across the years because daughters weren't as valued. There was a lot of infanticide of daughters that were born, kind of just got rid of under the table. And so there's a big distortion between the number of men and women. There's way more men in China than is average or statistically normal. And so they say that's kind of a ticking time bomb.
So I guess with this policy change, what the government is hoping is that with the new babies that will be born in China, that ratio will swing more in a 50-50 favor.
Yep.
As opposed to where it is now.
And also that the aging population time bomb, which is something they're going to face in maybe 10 years or less, that can be alleviated. But it will obviously take decades for that to kick in.
Sure, but the sooner you initiate the policy, the quicker you can see the results of the change of the policy.
Yeah, but the problem is they, in 2015, just like 6 years ago, changed the one-child policy to 2 children.
Yeah.
And they didn't see nearly enough increase. In fact, they saw a year-on-year decrease in 2020 of 15%.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's not working at all. And so many demographic experts are saying, it's too little, too late.
So, okay. So if they didn't see any changes from the one-child to two-child policy, what makes them think they'll see any changes from the 2 to 3-child policy?
So they think that maybe the families that have 2 children. You know, the few that do choose to have that, they'll at least have more.
Okay.
Yeah. So even if there are families who don't care whether it's 1 or 2 or 3, they're just going to have 1 or 0.
Yeah.
They're not going to be affected. But the children or the families that are wanting to have more and more, they're just being held back by that limit. So they're going to put it to 3. Many experts were thinking they just get rid of a limit altogether.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but so here in Korea and probably other countries too, the government is trying to incentivize couples to have more children by offering, financial rewards and things of that nature. Can we expect to see that in China, I wonder?
I think absolutely there will be a lot of at least gentle encouragement, financial incentives, because when they went the other way and had the one-child policy, like there are horror stories of like forced sterilization and things like this, but it was actually a lot of just incentives to have fewer kids and fines if you had more. You just have to pay more taxes, basically.
We're talking baby policies today in Culture Vulture. Very interesting topic. We'll pick it up after this. Adele, Sweetest Devotion. Baby policies today in Culture Vulture. We talked about the recent news from China. Let's now look at some other countries and what kind of policies they have then, yeah?
Yeah, so there are a few other countries that have kind of gone to and fro a bit like China, a bit like Korea as well. Over in Iran, after the 1979 revolution, they were encouraging their kids to have, their citizens, to have more children. And then in 1988, they reversed it because they could see an economic crisis on the horizon, right? And they encourage people to have at most 2 children. But then again in 2006, because they've seen low childbirth, and this is what many experts say, just as a country gets richer, it naturally leads to childbirth decline. People want to spend their money and enjoy it rather than being tied to raising children.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, yeah.
And that's why still the highest birth rate countries are all in like sub-Saharan Africa and places like this. But if they do develop, people will just choose to have less kids.
So the stronger then your economy is on the global scale, probably the fewer children people are having in that country.
Absolutely. And that's the problem China faces. Like, no matter how much they increase that cap, people who are living in cities and are affluent, they're probably not going to choose to have more than 1 child.
Is America facing that problem, though? Because America has a population of, 350 million people now? Something in that range.
Sure. I think with America, I don't think they've got such a decline problem. They've got a lot of immigrants who have come to the country, and then immigrant families often have different rates of childbirth. That's one thing with China. They're saying maybe they need more immigration.
Right. So if you have a strong economy, probably the people from that country originally maybe are not, or citizens of that country are not going to be having as many children. But when you have a strong immigrant population, then that might counterbalance that. Oh, that's really interesting.
Absolutely. And in Europe, like a lot of the population growth has been really helped by having large numbers of migrants into the continent. But still, because they are developed nations and they've kind of tightened up their border controls, it's now the case where most countries in Europe have less than 2.1 in terms of the birth rate. So their populations will slowly start to decline. So yeah, in 2006, Iran then reversed it and said, we've got to be against the 2-child policy. We've got to encourage people to give birth more.
In Canada, I've never heard anything related to this type of news before. Like growing up and living there until I was in my early 20s, I'd never heard anything like this. Like I said, when I moved to Korea, hearing China's one-child policy was the first of any type of news of that I had ever heard.
Yeah, I guess Canada's definitely one of those places where there's more than enough land for exponential population growth at the moment, like Australia.
Yeah,
right?
Your neighbors are way over there, unless you're living in Toronto or Vancouver. Or
so that's why
Montreal.
they've got quite a good migration policy as well, right? You can more than support it. Some interesting efforts to increase the population in certain countries, starting off with Korea in the future. So what it's going to do starting next year, 2 million won cash for each child born, right?
A one-time payment?
Yeah, and then until they're 1 year old, it'll be 300,000 won per month, and that will go up to 500,000 won per month from 2025, which is not insignificant at all, and much more than we received for our kids. We did get some benefits, but there wasn't like a lump sum, I don't believe.
So that was a question I was going to ask. So this isn't retroactive at all.
No, that's the problem. So many parents are like 2 or 3 kids now. We're like, what about us?
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter about you because you've already had your kids.
Yeah.
It's kind of a cold way of looking at it.
The government isn't worried about you. You've already done your part. Yeah.
Unless you're going to have more.
Yeah.
And then there'll also be provided couples with 3 million won a month for their 3-month paternal or parental leave.
Wow. On top of their salary because you're still paid.
Yeah, well, it depends on what size company you work for.
Okay.
So I'm assuming it might not be a double payment, but for many people working in mid to smaller size companies who don't have to, I believe, pay 100% of your wages for that time, the government will like top it up so you don't miss out at all. So in Korea, there are many famous incentives. But over in Singapore as well, that's another country that really wants their citizens to have more babies. And in a YouTube campaign they did a few years back, they did a little song and a little rhyme to it.
Singapore loves their songs. They did the vaccination campaign song too. Well, how did that go?
I forget. You love
No,
this song.
I love that song. I totally forget how it goes though.
I think it was, this one was to the tune of maybe You and Me, Baby, you know, we're just mammals. That song by someone like Bare Naked. So I think it might have gone like, I'm a patriotic husband, you're my patriotic wife, let's do our civic duty and manufacture life.
Oh, that's romantic, isn't it?
It's manufacture life.
Honey, you know how much I love you. I've been thinking maybe it's time we manufacture some life.
I think it was the syllables in the song, because create life would be nicer, but manufacture it. I think so. Let's create a little life.
Wow.
Over in Japan, they do similar things to here in Korea, or what we're planning to do next year. One-time payment of $1,700 per birth, and then $940 for the first kid. And when you get to the fourth child, 10 times as much.
Are they doing, I mean, it seems like the potential problem with putting these policies in place is not the policy itself, but whether the policy is going to be effective or not.
Sure.
So what I would do if I were working for the government, perhaps, is do this massive survey of young people who are in their early 20s, maybe like not even close to being married yet, maybe, but just ask their opinion. Would this be enough of an incentive for you in the future, if that's your plan to get married and have children, then would this be enough? And then, you know, they'll take a little cross-section of the answers and find out whether that's good enough or not. Because otherwise, if you're putting a plan in place that's not going to work, the problem is you're not going to know it doesn't work until it's way too far down the road.
Sure.
Right?
It takes, like we said, decades for the changes to be felt. I'm sure every country must have put feelers out there, but I don't know how comprehensive the research would be, right? Yeah. They probably wouldn't do surveys on a large enough scale.
If they asked me, I'd be like, 2 million enough? I'd be like, keep going.
No, but you said like even monthly, they're going to give, right now they're giving 300,000.
From next year, and then from 2025, 500,000.
Would you say that covers like, you know, baby formula, the diapers, you know, all the things that go into raising a baby?
It may cover the basics, but it wouldn't, to me, be an extra incentive to have a child. Like, you'd have to be talking, I'd say at least
$1 million.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, but you're biased. You already have to.
Yeah, I want more. Give me more money.
All right, thanks for that, Pete. Really interesting. We'll leave the first hour there. Here's Justin Bieber, Baby.